Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about how to find a good source and what exactly a good source is. Okay, let's look at political bias and how that applies on specific topics. Let's look at the left. First, the left generally believes in an ideal society, and the way that they're going to create this ideal society without any problems is that they're going to create a lot of change. Now, the first change that they would do is that they'd create a lot of climate policy to combat climate change. One of these policies would be carbon tax, and a lot of other policies that just generally end the use of natural gas and create more renewable energy sources so that we're combating the issue of climate change. Now, they also believe that we should have higher and more progressive taxes. And what I mean by that is that for progressive taxation, they believe that we should tax the rich and tax the poor less, which means that we tax the rich a lot more than we tax the poor, and therefore we're actually distributing wealth, which is very good for the poor. Another thing that they believe in is that when we tax the rich a lot more, we see that we have a lot more money to spend in the government's budget. And so that creates a lot more social spending, and they believe that we should use that social spending for more welfare and things like UBI and a lot of programs that help the poor people and create more economic productivity. Finally, they believe that there should be more strict gun laws because they see that the guns are not necessarily regulated right now, and a few also believe we should ban guns, and it depends on how left you go on the spectrum. Finally, they believe in less military spending. They believe more on social spending. And once again, it depends on how far left you go, and it's not that they believe that we should get rid of the military, they just believe that we shouldn't spend as much on the military and spend a little bit more on the people of the United States. Now, let's look at the right. The right generally believes in preserving the current system. They believe in the status quo, and they believe that climate policy specifically will hurt the economy now. Their argument is that when we spend money on climate policy, we're actually hurting the people in the status quo for something that they don't really believe will be solved. And so they believe that they should prioritize the status quo over what may happen in the future. And that may be a belief that you'll see on the conservative side. Then let's also look at how they look on higher taxes and more social spending as a way that hurts the economy rather than helps. They believe that social spending doesn't necessarily help the economy and it actually hurts the economy more. So oftentimes when liberals are arguing for higher taxes and more progressive taxation, they don't believe in this because they believe that when we tax the rich more, the rich aren't necessarily going to pay their taxes anyway, and so we don't really see that ideal world really coming about, and so they believe that we should just stick with the status quo and we can't solve every single problem. They also believe that the Fourth Amendment supports the right to bear arms, so they don't really need gun laws. And finally, they prefer the current system where we spend a lot more on the military because the military not only is helping our hegemony around the world, but it also just tells everyone that we're the number one, and that's how we secure power in the global space. Okay, let's look at a quick video. It's just a fun video that really just gives you an idea of how like political bias can shape both sides and perspectives can be different on both sides.
By the way, when Obama went on TV to announce that they'd killed bin Laden, he spoke for 9.5 minutes. Trump yesterday did 48 minutes on this. And for further comparison, we thought it might be fun to match up Trump's speech about al-Baghdadi with Obama's about bin Laden, and we were right, it was.
The United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden.
Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi is dead.
The United States launched a targeted operation against that compound.
They did a lot of shooting, and they did a lot of blasting, even not going through the front door. You know, you think you go through the door. If you're a normal person, you say, knock, knock, may I come in?
After a firefight, they killed Osama bin Laden and took custody of his body.
He died like a dog.
But his death does not mark the end of our effort.
A beautiful dog. Talented dog.
We give thanks for the men who carried out this operation.
And I don't get any credit for this, but that's okay. I never do. But here we are.
May God bless you, and may God bless the United States of America.
And I'm writing a book. I think I wrote 12 books. All did very well.
So you're gonna see that this video is it's just a fun video, but you can see the differences between both of the speeches, and there's not necessarily much political bias. But if you look specifically at the person who made this video, which is Jimmy Kimmel, you'll see that he leans a lot more to the left. And so at times you may seem that like this video is slightly biased to make the left look a little bit better, but just a fun video. Okay, let's look at political bias in the media. So if we look at this graph here, there are a lot of different sources and they've put them on the left and the right, and garbage left and garbage right tells you that they're not reliable whatsoever in terms of political bias. And here they also give you high quality versus poor quality. So sometimes the sources aren't necessarily high in quality, but they're not, despite their political bias. So let's just take a few minutes to look at it and just pause the video and observe which sources lie where. This can be very useful for you in the future. Okay, let's look at dates. Oftentimes, the date of evidence can matter. So make sure that the evidence is as recent as possible unless you're referencing a historical event. And usually, if your evidence is more recent, it is more believable. Things change over time, so more recent evidence is more accurate. Let's think about it in the way that if you're in a round and you and your opponent have two pieces of evidence that say opposite things, sometimes you may want to believe the more recent evidence because, like I said before, things could change over time. So if I pull evidence from 10 years ago and my opponent pulls something from a year ago, I'm more likely to believe what happened a year ago rather than 10 years ago because it's more specific to the time period that we're talking about right now. Okay, let's talk about some good sources to use. In the end, deciding a good source is going to be up to you, but you want to understand that bias is something that exists in all sources, but you may want to consider how hard the bias is in the specific topic. I've used Vox sources multiple times, but it's not necessarily the best source to use all the time, but you just want to be mindful of that bias in that source. Now, let's also talk about some independent think tanks. The Heritage Foundation is a really good example. The Brookings Institute is another example. Heartland Institute is one, and World Watch Institute. These are all independent think tanks that are really good sources to use if you find them. Yeah, so that wraps up our video.